Hello and welcome in, everyone. We are so excited to have you here for today's session as we are wrapping up our winter career quest. My name is Hong Win, and I'm part of the Careers and Professional Development team here at WGU. And it's my pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker, someone who brings a wealth of knowledge and experience in talent acquisition and hiring. I'm thrilled to welcome in Angie, Senior Talent Acquisition Specialist at Sound Credit Union. And today, Angie will be sharing on Interviewing 101, where she'll share key strategies to help you prepare, make great impressions, and confidently approach your next interview. So, with that, Angie, I will pass things over to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Um, Really, what I'll do today is we'll kind of go through some interviewing basics. I love to hear myself talk, but I also love to be interrupted. So, if you guys have questions, please feel free to like unmute, ask me. We will save time at the end, but if it's something that's relevant that we're already talking about, please do feel free to just chime in. And I know I'll get some help monitoring the chat as well, so you can put those there. But we'll really just kind of dive in here. I think interviewing is so important for everyone. I don't really think that there's a place where you won't use these skills in your professional career. So as we jump in, our agenda today um, is we're going to start by talking about all the pre-work that goes into an interview. There's definitely a lot that you want to do leading up to that interview. We'll talk about how to conduct yourself within that when that interview is happening, both in a virtual and in a in-person situation. I've got some tips and tricks for you. We'll also talk about what to do after the interview. And then I'll save some time at the end for questions. And if we do have time, I'm happy to chat a little bit about who Sound Credit Union is and career opportunities that we might have. And we'll go from there. So jumping in here, the biggest thing I think is spending the right amount of time preparing for your interview. Your interview could really only be typically is going to be probably 30 minutes to an hour, but there should be quite a bit of preparation that goes into it beforehand. I know you guys are all in school, so thinking about you're not going to walk into that test blind, right? You're going to spend those hours studying, reading the materials, preparing for that preparing for that exam. So I would prepare the same way for an interview. So before an interview, I think it's really important to do your research on the company. I don't think you need to spend like hours digging through like annual reports and all of these crazy things, but take the time, go to the company's website, read through the about section, look for things that like stand out, maybe figure out if there are values that they talk about or language that they use. That resonates with you and your personal mission. I think, and like being able to connect to the company when we're interviewing people for Sound. I don't want someone that's just looking for a job. I want someone that really deliberately, specifically wants to work for Sound Credit Union. Reread the job description. So I know, you probably applied a couple of weeks ago. The job description sounded exciting, so you hit that apply button. But always go back and reread the job description. Have a good understanding of what the job duties are. And so that could be a job description that the organization's emailed to you, or it could be the job posting. I always think it's a really good idea to like bookmark jobs that you've applied for, so you can go back and reference those. If for some reason that like job would no longer be available online, I think it's totally fine to email the recruiter and say, hey, in preparation for my interview, could you resend me the job posting so I'm prepared? So definitely reviewing those. Maybe write down a couple questions you had. Like, for example, I know when I was interviewing for my role here at Sound Credit Union, I asked things like, how much time am I going to be spent doing this type of work or this other type of work, right? How many interviews a day would you expect me to do? Things like that. So you can kind of get a good understanding of how the company structures their roles. And then practice. How do I practice an interview, right? But we practice for so many other things. You practice for a sporting event, you practice for an exam. So we should definitely be practicing for an interview. Couple of ways to do this would be recruiting a friend or family member to just ask you questions. If you Google online, you can find like top 100 typical interview questions. Like print that out and ask them to randomly select them and see how you'd answer. A lot of schools also offer like different programs through your career and employment services that will help you prep for interviews. If you don't have someone that you can enlist to kind of do that live practice, even taking the time to like read through those common interview questions and kind of like thinking to yourself, okay, how would I answer this? What would I specifically say? And either like taking notes about that or just kind of like mentally practicing that can be really helpful as well. You'll also want to be prepared with examples of your work. And this will kind of make more sense when I think you look at what those common interview questions are, but thinking through times where you have maybe led a successful project, or maybe a time you made a mistake and what you did about it. So kind of thinking through those examples and maybe jotting them down so that when you get asked a question, you're not like having this blank Rolodex of, oh God, like what did I do there? Like what did happen, right? So having that kind of prepared. And this last piece, being ready to discuss pay. I think this one is always such a touchy subject for everyone. And I think we all just need to take a deep breath and understand that, pay is the reality of working, right? Like you go into an employer to work to be compensated for your time, and that employer compensates you for your time based on the work that you do, right? It is fundamentally a transactional process. So I don't think there's anything wrong with talking about pay and being on the same page there. But be prepared, right? I think the worst thing is if at the end of the interview, the recruiter says, well, what are you looking for in terms of a pay rate? And you're like, I don't know, right? So I work in Washington, some credit unions based in Washington State. So we have a pay transparency law. So we're required to post all of our pay ranges on our job postings. They're all available online. So I would expect a candidate to have looked at that. We discuss kind of typically what our hiring range would be. And so I would expect a candidate to come in and say something along the lines of maybe, well, I saw what the hiring range is and I would be comfortable, or I'd like, somewhere to the middle of that. Maybe they would have a number, but that I would also expect that to be in alignment with what we had posted on our job posting, or else why would that candidate have applied? And B, if they did apply and didn't pay attention to that, that would be a concern for me because of lack of attention to detail. So being prepared to that. If you are applying to positions that don't have a like compensation listed, I would use the tools available to you like Glassdoor, Indeed, LinkedIn will often like summarize average pay bands. And you could use that as a little bit of a guide. I think it's totally fine to say a range too. Like, don't feel like you have to be like 25, 50 an hour. You could say, I'm looking somewhere between, 23 and 25 based on my experience. And I think having those ranges allows the organization to also go back, look at their internal equity and their teams, what they're paying other people in the organization for similar roles, and how your experience aligns with that. And allows them to be a little bit more flexible, which just could increase the likelihood that you'd actually get an offer from that organization. So kind of, I know, a little taboo, but I think we should untaboo it and just be honest. Like every individual who works has a budget that they need to be within, and every organization that is hiring people has a budget that they need to be in, and hopefully that there is alignment there, and sometimes there isn't, and that's okay, and better to know early on in the process so no one wastes their time. All right, so diving a little more into do your research. I think tying in some of your experience into how you could accomplish future goals is really important in the interviews. For example, we have a community relations team at our company, and their job as a whole is to go out into the community to build relationships with other organizations and schools. If you were applying to this team, you could say something like, I saw on the website that you're continually growing your community footprint. I have several community relationships in other cities that I'd love to connect you with once I'm in the role. So kind of like really tying that in. I think you could also research the interviewer's background, right? Utilize LinkedIn to go see if you have mutual connections, maybe similar job history, especially if you've been working for a little while. Maybe you guys ended up working at the same organization at different times or in different roles. I wouldn't come off like super strong with this by saying like, oh, I saw on your LinkedIn, you're friends with so and so. But kind of just, if something comes up, naturally bring it up. And if nothing else, I think researching that interviewer's background just maybe takes a little of the bit of the mystery and unknownness about out of who you're interviewing with, and can kind of just make you feel a little more naturally comfortable. Think through and identify gaps for your experience and expertise that you may need to fill in for this role. So, if I'm circling back to that community relations team example I used earlier, if the hiring team said they don't have any connections in Kitsap County, which is like one of our counties here in Washington, you could pop in and let them know that you do, right? So, like sharing where you might be able to kind of fill in that expertise. I think it's also important to stay up to date on the company's current projects. You can find information about this on social media platforms or the company's website. LinkedIn is great for this. And bring those things up if they feel natural. For example, you could say something along the lines of, speaking of that, I saw on Instagram that you're opening up a few new locations. Like, how would this role tie into that? And that's just going to show that you did your research. Um, and really, I think it's about figuring out how to use this information that you went and out and got to your advantage to make yourself stand out within that interview process. By having done the company research, it shows that you have enthusiasm and that you're really interested in the role. And that does automatically make you stand out as a hire. I have people that come to our interviews and say how much they love how involved we are in the community. They'll give me examples of community events, and this really shows to me that they care about working for sound, not just finding a job. All right. So be prepared to talk about your work experience in an interview. This is really the chance to kind of showcase that. So I would start out by knowing different, like your accomplishments associated with each role. So I think that's where that prep time comes in, right? Like going back and saying, okay, at this organization, here are some like key things that I did and I accomplished, and writing those down. I think we forget to like, I've been in recruiting for 10 plus years at this point, and I forget, maybe the things I did in my first employer, and all the really cool things I should be proud of. So just taking the time to like really review your accomplishments and write them down. Be prepared to explain why you left the position. I think it's really important to not talk badly about former employers or teams. That can be seen as a red flag by interviewers. I think you can share if there were like concerns, but you really want to make sure that that language around that is really professional. So something as, the company values weren't the right fit. Be prepared to explain why. And that could be, I value having a lot of autonomy in my work, and I got a new leader, and that their leadership style really didn't work with that, and it just ended up not being the right fit for me long term. So something like that, as opposed to saying I had a boss that came in and wanted to micromanage every piece of work I did, and I felt like I couldn't make any decisions myself, and it was really overwhelming, right? Like those are two very different ways to talk about the same situation. And then last, know your dates of employment. It's also totally fine to have a resume with you, and we'll talk about that as well. But like, if you need to bring in a copy of your resume so you know everything, I think that's totally fine too. I don't expect like everyone to pull the dates they worked at different places off the top of their head, but they should have an accurate understanding of what they are. Okay. So here's a couple common standard interview questions that you should be prepared to answer in an interview. So a lot of times I'll start with kind of like, tell me about yourself. So this should be kind of a short, like elevator pitch style, like a little bit of an overview about your professional experience, how many years of experience you have in your industry, or maybe discussing like a new degree and how it pertains to the role. While also showing off some personality. There's a lot of different ways to tailor your answers to this question, especially if you're depending on the industry and type of role you're applying to. And I think it's totally fine to add like one or two little like personal anecdotes too. Like I might end it and say, I one of my passions and hobbies is like I love to cook and I love to bake, so I spend a lot of time, doing that. And I also love to travel, right? So showing a little bit about yourself and kind of starting to initiate that connection. Um, a lot also, why did you choose to apply for this role? Make sure it sounds intentional. I don't, if I say, why did you ultimately choose to apply for this role, and someone's saying, no, I just saw it on LinkedIn, that's not like making me feel real great about like that individual's goals and why they pick sound over, McDonald's. And then this is like actually my favorite interview question to ask, but tell me about a time you made a mistake, and what you did to fix it. So I think a lot of people go into an interview and they're like, I'm going to put my best foot forward. I don't want to talk about anything bad I did. And I think that that's not realistic. I think, being human beings, we all make mistakes. It's about what we do with that mistake. So can we own it? Can we learn from it, and can we move forward? So think about a time, in work where you made a mistake. Maybe I wouldn't pick one that didn't have a great resolution, right? Like you should have one that where you're like, okay, I made a mistake. Here's everything I did to correct it, and then ended up with a good positive outcome, and telling that story. So make sure you have something for this prepared, so you're not taken off guard by it. Also be prepared to answer what are your strengths. But then also along the lines of the mistake, what are your weaknesses, right? Like we are all human. We all have weaknesses. And we'll talk a little bit about how to answer this weakness question a little bit later. And then be prepared to answer why should we hire you. Typically this will be kind of like a wrap-up question, but use it as that opportunity to kind of just reiterate your elevator pitch, resell yourself, and what you would bring to the team. Okay, so we've done all the mental preparation. Now let's talk about some of the more like practicalities. So interview attire. Here are just some example images. These are just general tips on interview attire. You can pop on Google, Pinterest. They'll be your best friends when thinking about outfit ideas. You can also look maybe up at like the company or industry's dress code prior to your interview, because it really is going to depend on the organization that you're interviewing for. If you're walking into a bank, they're going to expect much more professional attire than maybe if you're walking in for a job at a warehouse, right? So tailoring that interview attire to the position is always good. I will say, I think it's always better to overdress for an interview than to underdress. So I would say for a in-person interview and more of an office type role, I would expect someone in more business professional attire, which is going to be closer to like a full suit, or at least, more of a blazer, like that, blazer and a skirt or slacks. That, and then we'll talk, and then for like maybe more of a virtual interview, I do expect people in a virtual interview typically to be a little bit more dressed down, understanding that they're likely like at home, and it does feel silly to put on like a suit jacket to like do a virtual interview, knowing like you're probably wearing sweatpants on the bottom, right? But I still think like taking the time, no matter what, to ensure that like the environment around you is neat. So if you're not using a virtual background, like ensuring that the office or space that you're in is clean, presentable, it's not your bed behind you with unmade with a bunch of messy clothes, right? It's, if you need to just move and sit with a blank wall behind you, that's totally fine. So professional environment around you. And then, something a little bit more like business casual on top, right? But being intentional about it. Like you don't want to look like you just rolled out of bed, for sure. You want to show that you've prepared. So let's talk about preparing for an in-person interview. So you are going to bring, oh my gosh, sorry guys. Got a little technical difficulty here. There we go. Okay, so you are going to bring your updated resume, pen, and notebook. I think that resume is really great, as we talked about, like being able to reference it for dates of employment if necessary. You can also offer it to the interviewer. They should, of course, from their recruiter, have a copy of your resume, but I just think it never hurts. It just shows that you're prepared and you're thoughtful. You're going to plan to arrive to the place of your interview 10 to 15 minutes early. This is going to allow you time for, like, if there's a car accident, circumstances outside of your control, like the lights take longer, Google Maps is wrong and you end up having to circle the block a couple of times, you can't find parking, whatever stuff will happen, having that buffer will ensure that you're not stressed. Then I would actually stay in your car and not go into the organization or the um, office until 5 minutes before your interview. If you go in too early, it can be really awkward. You're sitting there, maybe like I know in our space here at Sound, depending on what building you go to, like we don't have a lobby for you to sit in. So you just be like standing in our hallway until the person's ready to interview you. And you don't know, they might have back-to-back meetings. So I think really being there 5 minutes early shows that you are thoughtful, you are punctual, but you're also not putting like too much of a burden on them finding a place for you to sit and all those things. And then remember, just treat everyone that you interact with from the second you park your car, like walking through the building, no matter what, treat everyone with respect. People will talk. I worked for a organization where we had, a front desk, and she would interact with all of my interviews prior to meeting me, and she would come back and say, so-and-so was incredibly rude to me, and I wouldn't hire that person because I wanted them to ensure that they treated everyone with a level of respect, not based on like hierarchy or who they felt they had to impress. So just you're really being judged from the moment that you walk into that building. Okay, so that's what we're doing for an in-person interview. Now, we're in the day and age where virtual interviews are super common. I would imagine most of you are actually going to participate in virtual interviews, at least in the very beginning of the hiring process, over in-person interviews. So first and foremost, test your technology before the interview. Even for this presentation, I hopped on this 15 minutes before it was scheduled to start so we could make sure that I could share my screen, that my audio and video worked, and all of that good stuff, right? So we all know, even if it's on Teams and you use Teams every single day, like these platforms have updates, they like to make changes. You never know if the Wi-Fi is down, if your device has decided today it hates you, you just never know. So test your technology prior to the interview. I would say you could either do that, like start logging in like 15 minutes before the interview, or ideally you're doing it like the day before and then logging in maybe 5 minutes before the interview to do kind of a secondary test. We touched on this already, but assume you will be on camera, and so dress professionally. Again, like I think if this maybe what I'm in today is maybe a little casual, but if I had just like this long sleeve and like more of a cardigan, or even like I could even throw a blazer on, right? Like that wouldn't be unheard of for an initial interview that I'm really trying to impress in a professional role. And then you sweatpants on the bottom, right? Like no one's going to see that. That's totally fine. And then as we talked about, plan to log in kind of 5 to 10 minutes early. I can see like we do use Microsoft Teams, and I know you can do this with other platforms too, but I can see when people log into a meeting, and that is something I make note of. Did the person log in right on time? Did they log in early? Just as I would for like an in-person interview, like I want to ensure that that individual is punctual and is showing up a little before their interview. Okay, I'm going to take a pause here before we jump into what we do during the interview. Does anyone have any questions on all that preparation stuff that we went through?
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat yet, but if you do have any questions, feel free to throw it in there and I'll make sure to get them out to Angie.
Okay.
Oh, we do have one here from Sam. What are some good tips to approach the phone call interviews? That's a great question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. I would do a lot of the same prep, right? So all the prep stays the same. I think you don't have to worry about like your dress. I would, however, like set the stage for yourself. Like I would almost set up your stage like you were going to be in a virtual interview. So I would like sit at a table, sit at a desk, have a place to take notes, have your resume in front of you, kind of like set yourself up to feel in a professional environment. Like don't take it, laying down in bed, or maybe on your couch, relaxed out. Like I think you kind of really want to like physically set the stage for yourself. Make sure you're in a quiet environment. If you need to, lock pets out of the room, whatever you need to do for that. I will say, I think in this virtual day and age, everyone does understand that things happen. Like, when I'm working from home, like I can't control if the UPS man shows up. I can't control if my dog barks, so I think just being prepared if there are a couple distractions to handle that very professionally. If something could happen during your interview, so you have like we're getting a new roof on the house, right? Like I have roofers going on. I probably start during that interview via on the phone or virtually to say, I just want to make you aware, like I have, I have a delivery scheduled today. Like I have someone that's going to receive that delivery, but like we do have dogs. It could be noisy for a minute or two. Like I do apologize. I just wanted to give you the heads up. Like hopefully it won't happen during this time. And I think that's great because to me, I'm like, yeah, life happens. I get that. And you've given me the heads up so that when that happens, it doesn't need to be a big deal. So that might be the only other couple little things I would do differently.
Awesome. Thanks, Angie. Another question here from
Yeah,
Andy. When it comes to virtual interviews, is a blurred background okay instead of a virtual background? Another great question.
absolutely. Yep, totally. Be careful with the blurred backgrounds because you still can kind of see like what's behind you. So just like take a good look at it, right? Like it will only blur so much, if that makes sense. And be aware that kind of like as you move, sometimes you can see things behind you. So again, like don't have like a very messy room behind you. And then when you move, I can see it's messy. But yeah, totally fine to do a blurred background or virtual background. To me, that just shows that you were prepared.
Awesome. And I think those are the two questions we have so far.
Perfect. Okay, let's jump into what to do during the interview. So I've got some do's and don'ts for you. So we'll start out on the positives. So during the interview, you do want to practice good manners and body language. Be really engaged. Thank them for meeting with you. If you're in person, shake their hands, sit appropriately, sit with good posture. I think if you are virtual, I always like to like pin the video I'm looking at like up top directly under my laptop camera. I think it keeps me making like better virtual eye contact. So something to think about, like don't put your video like down in the corner and you're like, hi, I'm talking to you here. Like that's just weird. So being cognizant of where you're looking and where you're directing. I think it's really important to be authentic and be positive, right? This is your opportunity to show them who you are and who you are genuinely, because this is going to be a place that hopefully you're working for, a bajillion years and you love and you want to spend the rest of your life at, right? Maybe that's not everything, but I think going in with that mentality of like, I want to be who I am authentically and positively, and if they love me, then this is a great place for me. Hire answers back to your skills and accomplishments. We've talked about kind of how to prepare to do that. And then some don'ts. So don't speak negatively about previous employers. Make sure you have some professional answers to those situations. Don't ramble on your answers. Try and be as clear and concise as possible. We'll talk through some strategies to do that. And don't be untruthful. So I wouldn't lie about any experience you don't have, right? Like I think if you're lying in that interview and then the employer expects you to come in with a different skill set, like that's not a good fit for anyone. Don't lie about dates of employment. A lot of employers, as part of their hiring process, will like verify dates of employment titles held, things like that. So I always say it's just way better to be honest, because if someone's honest with me, we can make an educated decision about what is good for next steps. But if someone lies to me and I find out about it in our hiring process, that's an automatic disqualification for us because it's this act of dishonesty. So better to be truthful, and whatever will come from that situation will come. But if you lie and are found out, like most companies will just end the process there. Yeah, no, and no one wants that. All right. So talking about your greatest weakness, I said I'd circle back to this. I think when you're asked about your greatest weakness, I think it's really important to obviously be genuine and share what that is, but really to wrap it up and talk about what you did or are doing to improve upon that weakness. And why that's important is I think it really shows that you're a problem solver. Like everyone, we're all humans, right? We all have a weakness. We all have multiple weaknesses. So to me, it's not about the fact that what that really weakness is really anyway. It's more about what you're doing to improve upon it, showing that, and that shows that you're a problem solver and that you want to take action. I will say, when thinking about a weakness to share, I would try not to choose a weakness that's critical to the job that you're applying for. So we obviously hire like a ton of bank tellers. And one of the things that's really important is being able to handle cash fastly and accurately. So if I'm interviewing someone for a potential teller role and they're telling me, oh, I really suck at counting cash, it's just really hard for me. I'm really terrible at doing math in my head. Oh, I don't know, like that's maybe those two things wouldn't really align. And while I appreciate someone being like genuine about that, because if that is their weakness, they'd have a hard time in this role, it's just not going to help them get the job. So kind of being a little smart about what you're doing there. And I think a lot of people also do this, choose a weakness that can be redefined as a strength, right? So like, I've seen a lot of people talk about, I'm a perfectionist and what that means. And while I think that is, people kind of try to sell that weakness as a positive, I think it's a lot more genuine if you're just open and honest about a weakness and what you're doing to improve upon it in terms of that long-term development. And I think wrapping that up with what you're doing also really leaves the interviewer with a positive impression of that weakness. So don't be scared about it. Expect this question to come up. Just be prepared to answer it. Okay, so let's talk about situational interview questions. You guys may have not heard this, but I guarantee you probably have been asked a situational interview question before. So I like to call these types of questions like tell me about a time question. So tell me about a time you made a mistake and what you did about it. Tell me about a time you led a project and what the results were. And really it's asking you about previous situations, which you can see here with the STAR method that we're going to talk about. So the previous situation, what was the task that you did? Or what was that task? Then what was the action that you did? And then what was the result? And so it's based on the idea that we humans typically react and perform in situations similarly to how they historically have. So the interview is asking for an example in your past of a similar situation to see how you handled it, with the idea that that's likely how you would handle it again, should that situation come up while you were working for them. So I think keeping this in the back of your brain when you're like talking and answering a question. So when someone tells me, tell me about a time, I'm going to start by setting the scene. Okay, I was working for Sound Credit Union. I was on a team of 5 people. Okay, what was the task? I was tasked with updating our website to have better branding about our employer brand. Okay, what was the action I did? Okay, I worked with marketing. I wrote out a 30-day plan. I followed up and I implemented it. And then the result was I ended up having 10% higher traffic and 10% greater applications based on the rebranding we did on the website, right? So setting that so someone can understand the work and the results, but it also helps keep that answer a little narrow, right? You don't have to go into all the different layers. I don't have to say, Sound Credit Union, when we do interviews, we do this many interviews and all these different things that aren't actually really relevant to the task and action and result that I did. So kind of keep this in the back of your mind when you're going through those answering questions. All right. So, couple common mistakes to avoid. We've talked about this a lot, but I'm still going to say it again. Bad mouthing previous employers or employees or leaders. Fuzzy resume details. I think if you are on your resume putting like very, very broad job duties, that to me kind of makes me wonder, like, was this really a role? Are you being truthful and forthcoming on the resume? And avoid dressing inappropriately. Again, I think it's always better to dress more professionally, more conservatively. I have never disqualified someone for them being too dressed up for an interview. Avoid talking too much and going off topic. I know it's so hard. You're nervous. Like, my tick is definitely to talk more when I'm nervous. So I completely understand this one, but just take a moment, take a deep breath. I think you can see on here, showing up to an interview with a drink is not necessarily great, but it's totally fine to come with water, or if they ask you when you show up to have water or coffee. If you need to pause, take a sip of water, to just kind of shut yourself up, that is totally fine. I think it's really important to pay attention. So, however that is, if there are distractions, like, put yourself in a situation where you're not going to be distracted and you can really focus on that interview. Don't use your phone. If you're one of those people that can't look at it, if it's near you, put it away. Turn the ringer off. You can tell someone, hey, I'm on do not disturb for 30 minutes or an hour. I got to do this interview. And then, yeah, we've touched on the showing up to an interview with a drink. I wouldn't show up with your cute little coffee, right? I think it is totally fine to show up with a bottle of water. But anything outside of that, I would not do. And then I always just like to touch on these. I hope that this never happens to anyone, but I do think it's important to just understand that there are certain interview questions that are illegal for employers to ask you. Typically, it's going to be based around protected classes, so things like age, race, family status, marital status, gender, sexual orientation, national origin, disabilities, veteran or military status, and then kind of, maybe like prying personal questions. Most interviewers aren't doing this to be discriminatory. I say most, right? But they can be kind of uncomfortable situations to navigate. So I would just say, if there's a question that comes up that you feel like you don't feel comfortable answering, I would just politely decline to answer and just say, I'm sorry, I don't feel comfortable answering that question. If that continues to progress, I would just end the interview and say, thank you. I don't, at this point, like, I don't feel comfortable moving forward with this position. Like, I thank you for your time, and just end the interview there. Remember that you're also interviewing that company, and you should feel comfortable throughout the whole process. And do you really want to work for an organization that would be potentially doing this? So again, I hope this doesn't happen to anyone, but I also think it's important for you to understand as an employee. And then just kind of wrap up this section, a reminder to start and end strong. So start that interview by just being your friendly, loving self, right? Ask how that individual's doing that day, break the ice. Like, a lot of like, I interview all the time as a recruiter, but a lot of my managers interview maybe once or twice a year. So it's a little nerve-wracking for them too, right? They're trying to find that next fit for their team. So if you can make them feel comfortable, it will definitely shed a positive light on you as well. And then take that time at the end to make that lasting impression. Thank them. Tell them something positive that stood out to you or that you loved talking to them about. And that could be something like, thank you so much for describing the team to me. Like, I really, it sounds like a really dynamic environment, something like that. If they haven't already shared with you, I would make sure to just ask for next steps. And it can be something as, I really, as easy as, I really enjoyed meeting with you. Um, could you share with me, when I might hear about what next steps would look like? And they should likely be able to give you some sort of an idea there. And I just think, again, that shows that you're forward looking and still interested in the role. Okay. So again, I'll take another pause here before we jump into the last little bit about just what to do after the interview. Any questions for me on in the actual interview or anything that's come up?
Yes, we do have a couple questions in the chat. Thank you so much for the engagement, everyone. One from Andrew here. What are some good questions to ask the interviewer when they ask, is there any question you'd like to know or questions you would like to ask?
Oh yeah, great. Um, I want to say we're actually going to cover that.
Okay.
Yeah, if not, I'll come back to that.
Okay, perfect. Next one here from Dara. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. What if you're unsure about the dates?
Your dates of employment.
I think, yeah.
Yeah. Um, I would get sure. And I think that can be within like the month, right? It doesn't have to be like July 2nd to July 28th. I think you can just say, yeah, I was there July 2022 to June 2024. Um, and then if you are unsure, you should be able to contact that employer and their HR team should be able to provide you with those exact dates. And or you could look back at like tax statements or pay stub statements.
Awesome.
But
Next
yeah.
question. Yep. Next one here from Daniel. I was giving the option between a in-person interview or a virtual interview. I thought in-person interview might give a better impression, but in your opinion, is there one you should always choose if given an option?
Yeah, I think if I'm thinking about myself as a candidate, I would probably want to do an in-person interview. I don't know that I would do that for like an initial interview, but when I started, like, fun story, when I interviewed with Sound, it was 2021, so it was still very heavily in the pandemic, and I did my full interview process fully virtually, and I was deciding whether I wanted to accept the role or not. And I called my now boss, the hiring manager, and I was like, can I come in? I was like, I just feel so weird about accepting a job where I haven't seen the physical environment and like met people face to face. And she's like, yeah, come in. We'll like have lunch and everything. And that was really the kind of like final straw for me to be like, okay, I can see myself coming into the office here. I can see myself in this environment. So in that sense, I might encourage the in person. But again, you also have to weigh of like, can you make that work with your current work schedule? How far of a commute? How far of a drive? What stage of the interview process it is? But yeah, I probably would lean in person, but just for you and also for that manager to like physically get to see you.
Yeah, awesome. Next question here from Andy. I was laid off from my previous position. Is there a good way to address this without putting a negative spin on it?
I think layoffs are just such a reality of the world that we live in that I don't think you need to overthink that. I think just being honest and transparent. If you were part of a large scale layoff and kind of the amount, like, 20 or 30% of my department or team was eliminated, or I was laid off because the company decided to completely, um, stop the product line I was supporting. I think putting it in the bigger scheme of things is always helpful, but yeah, I don't stress out about it. It's the reality of working in the corporate world. You know, People get laid off all the time.
Thanks, Angie. And then last one in the chat so far. With recent changes in DEI policies, are those questions still illegal? Does it depend on the state now, or are those questions still protected?
Yeah, that's such a great question. We are, as an organization, exploring a lot of that right now. I think, unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you because I don't know that anyone knows yet. Um, I would imagine most organizations are going to move forward as they historically have done until there's further guidance from the administration and from other like professional organizations. Like, we're following really closely what SHRM is communicating out. We're working with our employment lawyers to understand the nuances there. So that's the best answer I have.
Thanks, Angie.
Yeah.
And
Believe
yeah,
me, I wish I had a
it's
more concrete one myself.
right, right. But yeah, thank you so much for that question. There, another one. Would a s- would a safe way to determine this be asking yourself, does this question have to do with me? Oh, with the required qualifications for the
Yep.
role.
Yep, exactly.
Great way.
Yeah, that is such a great point that like whatever they're asking should be about you being qualified for the position, not necessarily about your personal life. And again, they may ask like, tell me about yourself because they want to get to know you. And those are very harmless. And you're free to share whatever you want to share, right? Like I would probably, when I would introduce myself, I'd be like, oh yeah, my husband and I live in Tacoma. These are the things I do, right? Like, so I'm disclosing my marital status because that's just comfortable, something comfortable. I'm comfortable disclosing. Um, but the employer couldn't turn around and directly ask me like, are you married? Right. And who are you married to and all those things. So, don't feel like you can't share personal information that you're comfortable with. But again, yeah, if they're asking you specific questions, like if they asked me um, a question about my marital status that would have nothing to do with my job, right, as a recruiter. So yeah, how it replies back to the qualifications of the role is the best way to think about that. Yeah, great point.
Awesome. Perfect. And those are all the questions we have for now.
Okay, fantastic. All right. So after the interview, we this is where it came up, is to um come prepared with questions. So my general advice is to always come with at least 5 questions prepared, because a couple of them might already get answered just organically as you guys are like talking through the role. Um, I would say a couple of my go-tos are things like, tell me a little bit about the team and their dynamic. What are some of the goals for someone in this role? I also really like to ask people, what do you like most about working for the organization? And if there's one thing that you could change, what would you change? And I always listen for that one thing that they change, because I think a lot of people are a little caught off guard on it and they tend to be pretty transparent. And I always want to make sure that if the one thing they could change, that's not like a non-negotiable for me, right? So for example, like if someone's like, oh god, I wish I felt more comfortable like bringing concerns to my manager, like that might be a red flag for me, right? But if someone's like, I do wish that maybe we had a more organized system around our expense reports, I'd be like, yeah, who doesn't, right? Like that sounds like something I could live with in this role. So I think that's always a good one. um, we talked about it, ask for next steps, when you can hear back, even if it's just, hey, give me a ballpark. And then this is like a little more old school, but I think I still send a thank you email after the interview. I think the old school thought used to be like send a physical thank you card. I think most hiring processes move a lot faster than that now. So I would send a thank you email. It can be very short, something that just says, thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate it. I'm excited for this position and I'm looking forward to hearing from you on next steps. But I think that will definitely still make you stand out as a candidate. Um, I'm curious, I mentioned a couple of different ideas for favorite questions to ask at the end of the interview. Does anyone like throw in the chat some other questions that they love to ask? Maybe we can brainstorm for everyone. And then that's all I had for you guys. So as people throw those questions in the chat, I'll open it up for questions. Um, if there's anything else we didn't get to cover.
Awesome. Thanks, Angie. We do have a comment here in the chat from Addison. How is performance measured? Uh,
Yeah, that's a
yeah.
great, yeah, I love that as a great question to ask at the end of an interview. Like, yeah, what would success look like in this position? Along those lines too, what would you expect from someone in the first 90 days in this role? Along that way.
Are there any other expectations of this role?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
another good one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I could see that one's kind of a little like complicated too. Like I would hope that the organization has like in our process, we review a job description every time before we post it. So if like I was the recruiter, I'd be like, no, like I spent my time crafting the job description. It should be accurate. So maybe something a little broader of like, I've obviously read through the job description. Like, could you highlight maybe the top three things that are going to be most important? Is there anything in here that I should, maybe anything that doesn't explicitly written down? I don't know. That would be the only one that like a little maybe nuanced different way to do that.
That's a great point there, Angie. We got some here talking about what a typical day looks like. So that seems to be a popular one.
Yeah, be
Uh,
careful with the like typical day one if the role is a very common role. Like for me, that would almost be like a turnoff depending upon the position. So if I'm interviewing like a teller, I would kind of hope that you understand like what a teller position is. I think we all should have like a fundamental knowledge there. So I think it was going to depend on the role. But yeah, if you are, if you're applying to Starbucks as a barista, like what does a typical day look like? I'd kind of be like serving customers, making drinks, working on the register. Like, do you not know what a barista does? So be careful with that one. I know that, like, if that makes sense.
yep, yep, good point there. Another ending question, what software or tools are used in this job, if not brought up already?
That's a great one. And then yeah, that's an opportunity to like share, oh, I've used that. Oh no, I haven't used that system, but I've used X, Y, and Z. That's very similar. I think that's great.
Another one, can you tell me more about the team that I will be working with?
Yep.
How often does the team successfully meet quotas? Asking
hmm
that for my previous retail position, is that a good question for future interviews? Yes.
Yeah, if there's a sales component, like if you know that position would have a sales component, I think that that's always a good idea just to kind of help you understand what type of team you're successful or not successful that you're walking into. Or are the quotas that the organization's setting realistic or not realistic?
Yes, that's a great point. Another one, what are the challenges this company is facing right now, and how would I contribute to solving that issue?
Yeah, yeah. Maybe how would this roll as opposed to how would you? A little word fix there because I think I don't fully know you yet. So I don't know how you would, but how would this role be expected to contribute could be a good one.
That's a great way to frame it. And then would you have any recommendation for a candidate if they're trying to figure out, why is this role vacant? What did someone leave? Was it, on good terms or kind of gauging the culture there?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can always ask. Most companies are going to be pretty limited in what they'll share with you, just because that's essentially discussing the performance of likely a
Right.
prior employee. So that one's a little weird, can be a little touchy, right? Because like I'm not going to disclose confidential information about a former employee. But you could definitely start by just asking, is this a newly created position or is this backfilling someone? And everyone will be able to say what that is. It's new or it is backfilling someone. I don't know how in depth I would get into if they say it is a backfill, just because that from an HR standpoint, there's kind of limited information we can share.
Right. Perfect. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free to drop into the chat or you can raise your hand and come off mute as well. If you do think of a question later on, you are always welcome to email us and we'll make sure that gets through to Angie there. So we do have a comment of thanks. This was very helpful. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Angie, for your time and for all of our
Absolutely.
attendees. Yeah, there were a lot of great questions, a lot of great engagement as well. So we'll just give it another minute or so for anyone with any other questions.
Yeah. And then I'll throw this up here. This is just a little bit about Sound Credit Union. And so we're a local credit union. We're based in Washington State. We have 26 branches here. We're always hiring for different roles within our branches and our corporate office. And then we do also offer a 2025 summer internship program. They would have to be based in Washington, in the Tacoma area, since we do are a hybrid organization. But always just like to put that in here for anyone that is interested and local.
Awesome. Yeah. We do have a quick question here from Ian. Any IT roles available at
Yeah,
Sound?
we don't have anything on our IT team right now that will, that can change. We do obviously have IT as an organization, and I do anticipate having some internship opportunities in IT.
Awesome. Do you guys have a job alert feature that they can
Yeah.
maybe sign up for?
Yep.
Okay, there we
Yep.
go.
So
Perfect.
if it individuals are interested in the internship piece, you can follow this QR code. It'll take you to Microsoft Forms, and you can get your uh, like contact information, and we'll email out when those positions get posted. They'll get anticipating like middle of February is when our internships will open up.
Awesome. Another question here. If you haven't heard back after a given timeline, after the interview, and you've already felt followed up, when is the best time to move on or follow up again?
Yeah, I'm sorry that happened to you. It does happen. Recruiters are overworked just like everyone is. And sometimes there's a lot of balls up in the air and sometimes things get missed. So I think just, having a little empathy for the other person on the other side of the email. But I would say, I think if you've already followed up once, I think it's probably best to just move on and focus your energy somewhere else. If that individual is really interested in you, that recruiter or that company, they'll reach back out. If you, maybe if you're typically communicating that with them via email, but they've also texted you, you could also maybe try one more time in a different medium. But other than that, I probably would just kind of leave it, unfortunately. And also think about it from that standpoint of like, if they're not excited about you, then that's not a great home for you, and go spend your energy somewhere else for an organization that is excited about you.
Awesome. Great question there. Yes. If you do have any other questions later on, feel free to always email us and we'll make sure that gets through. But we'll go ahead and wrap up today's session. A huge thank you to you, Angie, for sharing such valuable insights on interviewing, and to all of our attendees for the great questions and engagement. Oh, we have a hand raised here, Sam. Let me see if I can get you unmuted here. Oh, nope, you're good, Sam. Okay,
Simply
no
trying to
worries. No worries. This it was recorded, so we'll make sure to send that recording out soon, along with that quick survey. And your feedback does help us continue to bring meaningful events here to WGU, so we'd love to hear your thoughts. And of course, we'd like to extend a big WGU thank you to you, Angie, for taking the time to be here and for your dedication in helping job seekers succeed. To everyone who joined us, thank you so much for being a part of today's session. Be sure to check out Handshake for upcoming events and visit our YouTube channel for these recordings and for new content. So, with that, wishing everyone a fantastic rest of your day.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, yeah, take care.
Bye.